All right. So, a little context before we kind of start reading Sing Unburied Sing. Sing Unburied Sing is the novel, National Book Award winning novel, written by Jesmyn Ward and came out in 2017. Um, One of the main characters we follow is Jojo. And when the novel starts, Jojo has just turned 13. Jojo is primarily raised by Pop and Mam, who are his grandparents. But he also has his mom, Leonie, who's in the picture. The reason why she isn't the main one doing the parenting with Jojo, and also his sister Michaela, is because she is dealing with a drug addiction, and she's also dealing with some trauma that she has over losing her brother when he was a teenager, Given, and also the fact that her boyfriend and the father of Jojo and Michaela has been sent to prison for drug dealing. Okay. And the story takes place over basically the day that Jojo turns 13. Leonie gets a phone call that Michael's about to be released from prison. So it's kind of a car trip to pick him up and bring him home. But the story is also a ghost story. So along the way, Michael is not the only person who comes back with them from the prison. So, little teaser there. Great story, great novel, excellent read. All right, so here's the family tree. Once again, Pop and Mam are Leonie's parents and also Given, her brother who died when he was a teenager. And Leonie has two kids, Jojo, who's one of the main characters we follow, and Michaela, his sister. Michaela's about 4. And then their dad is Michael, and he's been in prison for 3 years and just being released when the story starts. We also are going to meet Richie, who is Pop's friend from prison. Pop was also in prison for a little bit, and he is now a ghost. And Misty is also Leonie's friend, and she appears throughout the novel as well. Okay, so when we think of text complexity, one of the things we're looking at as seniors is not just characters and themes and plot and things like that, but we're also trying to get to a few more complex texts, right? And when we think of complex text, we can think of it in 4 big categories. One is plot structure. Okay, so is a story just told from the beginning to the end in a simple fashion? The other is language. So is the story or poem or whatever very easy to read, or is the language kind of old? Think of like a Shakespearean play or Shakespearean sonnet, where we're using different words. The grammar is different. The syntax is longer. The sentence structure is longer in some of those older works, right? And that can be a huge barrier. So sometimes the plot can be a barrier, right? Like there's a lot of flashbacks or a lot of people involved. It's like, wait, who did what? When is this happening? Sometimes language is the problem if you have a difficulty reading it because you're just not familiar with some of those older words or older sentence structures. The other thing that makes a text complex is the layers of meaning, right? Sometimes pretty simple story. Think of an action movie. It's just straight action. There's a hero at the end. But a lot of times a novel or poem or anything you're reading or watching has different layers under that surface. There's a metaphor here or a symbol here or a theme here that we're trying to get to, or the artist or writer is trying to get to. So how many layers of meaning there are can also make a text complex if it's not just a simple plot story. And the final thing that makes a text complex is the similar life experience to the reader, right? And that's a really hard thing to gauge because we all have different life experiences based on your gender, based on your age, based on where you grew up, based on your race and your religion and or lack thereof, and all these other things about your culture and how you grew up. Okay, but if you read a story about a culture or time period or a character who's very different than you, then that might also throw you for a loop. It might make it complex. So you're struggling to understand their world a little bit. But it can also be a lot of fun, right, to read characters that are different than us. Okay, so in Sing Unburied Sing, its text complexity comes in a couple of ways. So the first thing is the plot structure, and that's one of the things we're really going to focus on because that's one of our main teaks in this particular unit. The plot structure is a nonlinear plot. There's a lot of flashbacks. They go back to the past a lot. There's also subplots, which means that there are underlining stories with different characters that connect to the main plot that are also happening as we go through this story. And the last thing that makes this story really complex is it's told from multiple points of view. So we get to hear from Jojo, said he was one of our main characters. It's written in his point of view. Some chapters are written in his mom's point of view, Leonie, and some chapters are written in Richie's point of view, who is the ghost who comes back with them. All right. The language is pretty accessible. Like, there's probably not a lot of words in there that are going to throw you, or you're going to find like, hey, I don't know that word, but it's still poetic. There's a lot of figurative language to it, and there is some regional dialect. So some of the words and grammar constructs kind of sound like Southern accents. Okay, so that might be the one part that makes it a little bit complex. Is the sentence may not read um, or sound exactly the way you talk, but it might. A lot of people have Southern accents, or at least know a lot of people that do. All right, layers of meaning. So on the surface level, this is a road trip, right? Jojo, Michaela, and Leonie, and her best friend Misty are going to prison to pick up Michael, who has been released and is coming home. And the story basically takes place over 3 or 4 days with that happening. They leave, come home, or leave, go get him, and come home. It's also a family story, right? It's a look at this family that it's had a lot of sadness and trauma in their lives, and how they deal with it, and how they still try to like function and help each other out, and move on as a family unit and take care of each other. Some of the characters in the family, or some of the family members, are way more successful at that than others, but that's part of it. It's also a ghost story, right? We're going to meet Richie along the way, and he plays a very fascinating role. He's one of our subplots here, in what he brings to the table. And like any really complex and good work of literature, these are all metaphors, right? So these are metaphors for a historical look at life in the South at the time. It's a look at this family and what it means to come from a family that is in crisis, right? And we know that a lot of families are like that. So just kind of keeping that in mind and taking a real honest look at that. The other thing that makes it a very meaningful and subtle text is the characters' actions leave a lot to infer. Like, we do get a lot of the characters' thoughts, definitely, but we also have to infer why they're doing what they're doing a lot. And so that might make it a little bit more complex. And there's also symbols and metaphors galore. Like, anytime something's a ghost story, it's not just a ghost story. The ghost is always meant to be more. That's always a layer. All right. So, similar life experience to the reader. This is a mixed race family. It takes place in coastal Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina, and it also flashes back to the 40s in the same time period. So, if you grew up there, or if you have family there, or if you spent a lot of time there, or then maybe like a lot of the things that are happening are going to be like, oh yeah, I totally get that, or I've been there, or seen things like that. But if you haven't, if you've spent your whole time in San Antonio, Texas, then this story may be not as relatable in that regard. You may not be as familiar with a lot of the things they're talking about. So this one is always like just up to the reader, right? Like how complex it is in terms of how it relates to you. It's just kind of luck of the draw, and because we all have different experiences. All right, so that's it. That's a little bit of background about Sing Unburied Sing, and we're going to get to reading it in just a little bit.